The car door slammed shut, the engine roared, and Madeline, 72 years old, stood alone at a highway rest stop, watching her son's SUV speed away, dragging dust and with it the last fragments of her trust. Her own flesh and blood had just abandoned her, as if she were an outdated object. The moment froze in time. Madeline's heart clenched as her trembling hand gripped the strap of her handbag. In her ears echoed the voice of Sophie, her 13-year-old granddaughter. "Dad said you're busy, that you don't want to come to my house." Those innocent words pierced her chest like a blade, sinking deep into the hollow of loneliness. But Anthony, the one who had just driven off, had no idea that the mother he dismissed so easily was holding a secret powerful enough to alter their fate. She was not merely a helpless old woman. She was the legal owner of the very house they lived in, the holder of a loan contract worth $80,000 tied to a mortgage. 6 months earlier, it had all begun with a midnight phone call. Anthony's voice was choked with panic. "Mom, we're about to lose the house. Lillian lost her job, Sophie's tuition, Noah's fees. I don't know what to do." Madeline sat in her worn armchair at the retirement apartment in Phoenix, her chest tightening. Though he was 47 years old, his voice trembled like that of the little boy who once scraped his knees, falling from a bicycle and cried out for his mother. Memories rushed back. Sleepless nights, desperate sales of jewelry to cover his school bills, sacrifices she had made without hesitation. Now, once again, his cry for help rang out. She could not turn away. Slowly, she opened the safe, her hands shaking as she lifted each folder of life insurance policies left by her late husband. That money had been reserved for her old age, her safety net for the years ahead. But hearing Anthony's plea, she knew what she would do. She would give it up. $80,000, the sum that could rescue her son's roof. Yet Madeline was not blind. She had once lived beside a dreamer of a husband whose failed ventures left her carrying debts. She understood well that help must always be tied to protection. So she called her lawyer, instructing him to prepare a loan contract with a mortgage clause on the house Anthony claimed as his. Anthony hesitated for a moment, then signed, "You're my savior, Mom. I promise. As soon as Lillian gets a job, we'll repay everything." Madeline smiled, convinced she had chosen wisely, that she had both saved her son's family and protected herself. In the first months, everything seemed calm. Every Sunday, Anthony called, telling her about Lillian's interviews, about Sophie's love of painting, about Noah being chosen for the soccer team. They sent photographs of family dinners, bright faces around the table. Madeline looked at those pictures with joy swelling inside her chest. She believed her sacrifice had been worth it. Then the calls grew fewer. Anthony's voice became hurried. "Mom, I'm busy. I'll call you later." Later never came. Lillian disappeared from the conversations. Each time Madeline answered the phone, only her son's dry tone remained. One March afternoon, she asked gently, "Are you all right? You sound so tired." Anthony replied quickly, "I'm fine, just busy." But Madeline knew the truth hid elsewhere. In April, she suggested attending Noah's birthday. Anthony stammered, "Mom, Lillian's parents are already here. The house is crowded, you understand. Maybe next time." But next time never arrived. When she asked about Sophie's art exhibition, another excuse appeared. "Lillian is busy. Her sister is visiting. I'm away for work." Lies stacked upon lies like bricks building a wall, erecting an invisible barrier. Madeline tried to reassure herself. Perhaps they truly were busy, yet inside, the cracks widened. The breaking point came one May afternoon with an accidental call. Sophie answered when Anthony left his phone unattended. "Grandma, I miss you so much. When are you coming to visit? Dad says you're busy, but I want to show you my new room. We painted it purple." Madeline's heart twisted. A new room? Why had she not known? Why was Anthony lying not only to her, but also to his own children? Anthony's voice suddenly erupted, snatching the phone, breathless. "Sophie, give that back. Sorry, Mom, I'm busy. I'll call later." that call never came. That night, Madeline sat by the window, the scattered city lights reflecting across her aging but resolute face. On the walls hung photographs, Anthony's wedding portrait, Sophie's drawings, Noah's soccer trophy. Every frame whispered of the love and sacrifice she had poured into them, and now, in return, they offered avoidance, deception, exclusion. The ache in her chest was sharp, but in her eyes flickered a cold spark. If they believed she was only a weak, disposable old woman, they were mistaken. In the wooden drawer of her desk still lay the signed loan contract and the mortgage document. She was not just the abandoned mother. She was the rightful creditor, the woman with the power to change the game entirely. Closing her eyes softly, Madeline whispered into the silence, "You think you're clever, but the final move still belongs to me." Madeline could no longer endure the indifferent phone calls, the smooth excuses delivered as though they had been rehearsed, like lines from a play. Inside her, a quiet suspicion was growing larger every day. Each night she sat alone in her small apartment, gazing at the framed photograph of Anthony's family in happier times, and her heart ached as though pierced by thorns. She had sacrificed to secure their roof, yet now she was being pushed aside, treated like a stranger. One morning she made a decision. She would not wait for an invitation. She would go herself and see with her own eyes how her son was living. She booked a flight to Denver, rented a small car at the airport, and drove toward Thornfield. All along the highway, her heart pounded with anxious rhythm, both fearful and hopeful. She imagined Sophie and Noah rushing to embrace her, their laughter ringing through the house. Perhaps, she told herself, Anthony had merely hidden his struggles, not wanting to worry her. Perhaps Lillian was ashamed of not yet finding work. Surely things could not be as bad as they seemed. She tried to cling to those explanations, yet unease crept into every thought. When the car finally turned into the leafy suburb of Thornfield, Madeline froze in disbelief. The street was lined with handsome homes, shaded by tall trees, with lawns neatly trimmed and shrubs cut with professional precision. It was the opposite of what a struggling family should look like. Anthony's house in particular stood out, with its manicured lawn, gleaming windows, and a brand-new BMW parked confidently beside the old pickup truck. Madeline's pulse quickened wildly. All the desperate cries for help, all the trembling pleas over the phone suddenly appeared hollow, artificial, staged. She drew a long breath and walked to the doorbell. When the door opened, Anthony appeared, his face paling at the sight of her. Mom? What are you doing here?" he stammered. "I came to see you and the children," Madeline answered with a forced smile, concealing the rising hurt within her chest. Anthony glanced nervously over his shoulder. Through the narrow gap in the door, Madeline glimpsed Lillian arranging an expensive bouquet in a sparkling crystal vase. Their eyes met, and Lillian forced a polite, brittle smile. "Madeline. What a surprise we didn't know you were coming." Without waiting for permission, Madeline stepped inside. The house was filled with luxury, every corner gleaming with modern technology, sleek furnishings, and a gigantic flat-screen television dominating the living room wall. It was nothing like the picture of hardship Anthony had painted. "Where are the children?" Madeline asked, scanning the rooms. Anthony's eyes flicked sideways before he answered quickly. "They're both at birthday parties. Same time, so I guess you won't see them today." "Quite a coincidence, isn't it?" Madeline said evenly, though her eyes sharpened with suspicion. Lillian interjected smoothly. "Sophie is at Madison's. Noah has a teammates party. They're very busy kids." Madeline fell silent, though inside a grim intuition stirred. Everything felt arranged, orchestrated, the polished house, the polished lies, the convenient absence of her grandchildren. She settled onto the velvet sofa, stroking the plush fabric with slow fingers. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Anthony sat opposite, straining to maintain a smile. "Mom, you really should have told us. Today isn't ideal. We already have plans for tonight." "Plans?" Madeline raised an eyebrow. From the kitchen, Lillian's voice floated out. "Yes. Friends are coming. We've had this party on the calendar for weeks." Those words struck Madeline's heart like a slap. She had sacrificed her old age, sold away her peace to save this house for them, and now they held parties in that very house while finding ways to push her aside. She wanted to shout, to confront them with fury, but she restrained herself. She knew if she exploded now, they would seize it as an excuse to sever ties completely. She needed to stay calm, to think clearly. "I won't be any trouble. I'll see the children tomorrow, then I'll go home," she said with composure, though her eyes glinted with a cold determination. Anthony and Lillian exchanged a fleeting glance, a silent exchange too quick for most to notice. But Madeline saw it, and in that instant she understood. She was being managed, contained, deceived, kept away from the true heart of their lives. The conversation dragged on for another hour, heavy and awkward. Every suggestion Madeline offered, taking the children for ice cream, sharing lunch the next day, even staying overnight, was politely but firmly refused with yet another excuse. Finally, she rose. "I'll go back to my hotel. I don't want to intrude." Anthony exhaled in relief, forcing a smile. "Thanks for understanding, Mom. Next time, let us know so we can prepare." As she stepped out of the gleaming house, Madeline's stomach twisted. Driving back to the hotel, tears rolled freely down her cheeks. But beneath the sorrow, a new clarity began to form. Her son had deceived her. The money she had given up was not used to rescue them from ruin, but to decorate a life of luxury and appearances. That night, lying in the dim hotel room staring at the dark ceiling, the memory of Anthony's tearful plea 6 months earlier returned again and again, shattering like glass. She no longer believed in those tears. Her heart ached with betrayal, but beneath the ache, a flame was rising. She would not remain passive any longer. She would dig for the truth, uncover every hidden layer, no matter how deep. In the darkness, Madeline whispered to herself, "If my children see me only as a wallet, I will show them the truth. This wallet can close, and the house they flaunt will no longer be theirs." Her eyes gleamed fiercely in the night. From that moment on, the disregarded mother transformed into an adversary Anthony and Lillian had never anticipated. The next morning, Madeline sat in the hotel room holding a cup of coffee gone cold. Outside the window, sunlight pushed through the curtains, but she felt no warmth. Inside her, another fire burned, fierce and unrelenting. She knew her son had lied, but to what extent? How many of Anthony's tears over the phone had been real, and how many were merely rehearsed for effect? She opened her laptop. Her hands trembled slightly, yet her eyes were sharp as ice. Madeline began with the simplest searches: public records, business filings, property registrations. She was no expert with computers, but her years with her late husband, a cautious businessman, had taught her how to investigate, how to read numbers and patterns. Within minutes, truth struck her like a slap. Lillian was not unemployed at all. In fact, she had accepted a new position at a marketing firm 4 months earlier, earning a higher salary than in her previous job. As for the shiny BMW parked in the driveway, the public purchase record revealed financing papers filed just 2 months after Madeline had sent her savings. Her eyes locked on the words, "Down payment, $35,000. That sum, Madeline realized bitterly, was none other than her own money, the very funds she had sacrificed to save her son. Every line of those documents cut into her trust like a blade. Quietly, she whispered to herself, almost as though speaking to a ghost, "So this is what it comes to, Anthony." Memories flooded her mind. The little boy who had once run across the yard with dirt on his clothes, crying after scraping his knees. The teenager who had carried his books with shining eyes, talking endlessly about his dream of college. the middle-aged man sobbing into the phone, begging his mother to rescue his family. And now, all of it seemed to vanish, leaving behind only a manipulator using his mother's sacrifice to build a life of luxury. Madeline did not cry. Instead, she felt hollow, and from that emptiness rose something cold and unyielding: resolve. She drove back to Anthony's neighborhood and parked discreetly at the end of the street. From there, she watched in silence. Through the large window, she could see the children running and playing in the yard. The very same children Anthony had claimed were away at birthday parties the day before. Her heart twisted. They had turned her grandchildren into excuses, a false shield to cover their deception. When Anthony stepped outside holding a glass of wine, Madeline turned her face quickly to avoid being seen. She did not want him to notice her. Instead, she raised her phone and snapped several photographs: the luxurious house, the gleaming BMW, the children laughing in the garden. Evidence. That afternoon, back at the hotel, Madeline called her old lawyer, Margaret, the woman who had drawn up the original loan contract. Margaret's calm voice could not hide her indignation as she listened to Madeline's story. "Madeline, you still have the original contract, don't you?" "Yes," Madeline replied. "It's in the safe at my apartment." "Good," Margaret said firmly. "Then you need not worry. With everything happening, you have the right to call in the loan at any time." Madeline paused before answering. "I don't want to do it yet. Not immediately. I need to know more. I want the full truth." After the call ended, she opened the photographs again. The children's innocent laughter filled the images, unaware that their parents were staging a cruel deception. For a moment, Madeline's gaze softened, but then it hardened with resolve. She would not hurt the children, but she would no longer allow Anthony and Lillian to treat her like a puppet. That night, she barely slept. The hum of cars on the street mingled with the rapid beat of her own heart. She imagined the future, the house seized, Anthony and Lillian forced to bow their heads, their excuses collapsing in the face of undeniable facts. The next morning, she chose action. She drove again to the neighborhood, this time seating herself at a cafe across from a small park. From that vantage, she could clearly see Anthony's house. Patiently, she waited, watching. Near noon, a group of elegantly dressed guests began to arrive. Laughter and the clinking of glasses soon carried from the backyard. A party. While Anthony clasped hands with friends, his face radiant, Lillian stood beside him in a new dress, smiling as though she had never known hardship. Madeline felt her blood boil. Every desperate plea, every word of struggle, had been nothing but a mask to conceal this display of abundance. She lifted her phone and pressed record. The image of Anthony raising his glass, of Lillian's glittering smile captured forever. Their performance of poverty shattered instantly before her eyes. By late afternoon, she returned to the hotel, her hands still trembling. She sat at the desk, opened her laptop, and began writing a long letter. She did not send it, not yet. She simply let the words pour onto the screen. In the letter, she wrote, "Anthony, you have forgotten that your mother not only gave you life but also holds the roof over your head. You think I am weak, but it is I who hold the key." When the letter was finished, she closed the laptop with a heavy sigh. Beneath her grief, another strength had been born. She was no longer just a betrayed mother. She was the one holding the decisive peace. Outside, the Denver sky was streaked red by sunset. Madeline stood by the window, watching the fading light. Inside her, she knew with certainty the real battle had only just begun. Madeline returned to Phoenix with weary eyes, yet her heart was harder than stone. In her small apartment, she opened the safe and took out the loan contract. That fragile sheet of paper had become a weapon in her hands. Every line, every number, especially the phrase "mortgage on the house in Thornfield," glimmered like steel, reminding her that real power had never left her control. For weeks she kept silent. Anthony continued to call, but their conversations grew emptier each time. He claimed he was overwhelmed at work, that the children were buried in school, that his schedule left no room for visits. Madeline listened, stored every word in memory, and replied with a calm and flat tone that gave away nothing. She knew deception could not survive forever. On a sweltering afternoon, she finally made her move. She called Anthony, her voice slow but burning. "Anthony, I want to see the children. This week." At the other end, there was a long pause, then a laugh too forced to be real. "Mom, I'm sorry. This week, Sophie has a recital and Noah has a soccer tournament. It's not possible." Madeline's tone tightened. "Then next week." Again, he evaded. "That may not be convenient either." The conversation ended with the hollow slam of a phone line. In Madeline's eyes, a cold spark ignited. If they treated her with contempt, then the law would answer for her. The next morning, she went to her lawyer's office. Margaret read every page, lifted her head, and said firmly, "You hold full rights. I will send the notice demanding repayment in 30 days. Madeline nodded. She'd never wanted to destroy her son, but betrayal had crossed the boundary. She whispered to herself, "If they see me as a stranger, I will act as a creditor." 3 days later, Anthony began to call in panic. Madeline let the phone ring until the third attempt before answering. His voice shook. "Mom, I received the lawyer's letter. What does this mean?" Madeline spoke without emotion. "It means what the contract states. 2 years to repay. You have paid nothing." Anthony's tone rose. "You can't do this. We are family." Madeline let out a bitter laugh. "Family does not lie. Family does not use my money to buy a BMW and host parties." Silence stretched. Then his voice softened to begging. "Mom, I'm sorry. I only wanted to give the kids a better life. Please give me more time." Madeline's answer was clipped. "You have 30 days. If not, the house is mine." She ended the call, then sat down, her hands trembling faintly. She knew the battle had truly begun. That afternoon, Lillian called. Her voice was syrupy, like honey masking knives. "Madeline, be angry if you must, but think of the children. They need stability." Madeline's tone was cold. "Stability bought with my money? Stability built on lies?" Lillian did not falter. "You have your pension, your savings. We are young. We need more. You do not." Madeline gripped the phone tighter, feeling the weight of shameless arrogance. "If you cared for the children, you would not turn them into excuses. I will not withdraw. This time, I will go to the end." There was silence, then a sigh. Before hanging up, Lillian slipped in one poisonous threat. "Fine, but don't blame us if the children turn against you." That night, Madeline tossed in bed. The thought of Anthony and Lillian twisting Sophie and Noah's hearts filled her with dread. She feared they would be led to believe she was the enemy. Yet she remembered sitting in her car, watching them laugh on the lawn, innocent, unaware of the lies surrounding them. They were not to blame. Someday the truth would be revealed. Margaret moved the legal process forward. Madeline signed each paper with a steady hand. This was no longer about money. This was about dignity. A week later, Anthony appeared at her door in Phoenix. When Madeline opened it, she saw him gaunt, eyes red from sleepless nights. He rushed inside, voice breaking. "Mom, please withdraw this. I cannot lose the house." Madeline stood straight, her gaze unshaken. "Then pay." Anthony lowered his head, shoulders quivering, then looked up, his voice shifting to anger. "You are selfish. You always hoard money. You would rather see us suffer." Madeleine rose sharply, her voice thunderous. "Suffer? With a BMW, with parties of wine and laughter. Stop lying. I have seen everything." The small room seemed to tremble. Anthony froze, his eyes blank, his mask stripped away. Madeline's breath came fast, then her voice dropped low, each word icy. "You treat me like a walking wallet. But you forget. This wallet has a lock, and I hold the key." Anthony bowed his head, unable to speak. When the door closed behind him, Madeline sat down. Her heart still heavy, but her eyes bright with clarity. The first confrontation had passed. She was no longer the victim. In her mind, she saw clearly the game had changed. Outside, Phoenix glittered with lights, and Madeline embraced the truth. This was only the beginning of war, but she was ready. Not merely to reclaim money, but to reclaim the dignity that had been trampled. Madeline had believed that after the fiery confrontation in Phoenix, Anthony and Lillian would finally retreat, but she had been wrong. Their silence was not submission, it was camouflage for a darker plot. One crisp morning, as she poured tea into her favorite porcelain cup, the phone rang with a tone that sliced through the quiet apartment. She answered, and a woman's voice, detached and icy, introduced herself. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Sarah Chen from Denver Social Services. We have received a report alleging that you abandoned your 2 grandchildren during a recent trip." Madeline froze. The cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile floor, hot liquid spreading across the cracks like veins. "What did you say? That is absurd. It was my son who left me stranded at a highway rest stop, not the other way around." But Sarah's voice remained unmoved. "We will investigate. Until the matter is resolved, all your meetings with the children will be supervised." The call ended abruptly. The room sank into silence heavy enough to crush her chest. Madeline lowered herself into a chair, her hands trembling violently. It was no longer only about money. Now her love for Sophie and Noah and her very dignity as their grandmother had become weapons twisted against her. That same afternoon, there was a sharp knock on her door. Sophie and Noah rushed in, arms flung wide, tears still glistening on their cheeks. They collapsed into her embrace, followed by a stern social worker holding a clipboard, eyes cold and observant. "Grandma," Dad said, "you don't want to live with us anymore." "Is that true?" Sophie whispered, her voice so fragile it seemed ready to break. Madeline squeezed them tight, whispering through tears, "Never, my loves. You are everything to me." The official sat in silence, writing notes, every movement an evaluation, every gesture turned into evidence. For 2 long hours, Madeline smiled despite the ache in her chest, listening as Sophie described her art class, as Noah spoke about his soccer team. Yet the children kept glancing at the supervisor in the corner, fearful that even their laughter might be twisted into proof against their grandmother. When it was time to leave, Sophie clutched Madeline's hand, whispering, "Grandma, I want to live with you." The words tore Madeline apart, but also lit a fierce flame. That night she called Margaret, her lawyer, her voice unsteady yet unyielding. "They accuse me of abandoning the children. I cannot stay silent any longer." Margaret's voice was calm, but anger seethed beneath. "This is a vile trick. We will fight with truth, collect evidence, every receipt, every document, every detail. I will handle the law." Madeline stayed up through the night, writing the account of the day she was left behind, the exact time, the location, every phrase Anthony and Lillian had thrown at her. She printed the photo of the BMW in the driveway, the receipts of their parties, the proof of Lillian's employment. Only truth could tear down the walls they had built. A few days later, Anthony called, his voice caught between threat and plea. "Mom, stop this. If you continue, the children will believe you are destroying our family." Madeline listened quietly, then laughed coldly. "Anthony, you are writing your own verdict." That evening, she called Helen. Hearing the story, Helen trembled with rage. "You have endured too much. Now they smear you. We must fight back harder." Helen proposed hiring a private investigator. Madeline hesitated, her heart torn, until she pictured Sophie's tearful eyes. Then she answered firmly, "Do it. Reveal everything." Within a week, the first report arrived. Photographs showed Anthony and Lillian at a lavish restaurant, glasses raised in a toast, smiles bright beneath chandeliers. Bills itemized their indulgence. A recording from a bar captured Anthony's sneering voice. The old woman thinks she is clever, but she is just a walking wallet. Madeline's hand clutched the table until her knuckles whitened. Her breath ragged. The memory of the boy who once cried for comfort after falling, who once whispered "Mom" in the dark, crumbled into dust at the cruelty of those words. The investigator uncovered more. Gambling debts mounted under Anthony's name, wagers reckless and unpaid. Lillian's private social media posts flaunted a sponsored life. One message read, "Someone pays for the BMW, someone pays for the parties. Cleverness makes life easy." Reading those words, Madeline felt her chest tighten. Yet beneath the pain, a new force was rising. She realized the struggle was no longer about $80,000. It had become a war for truth, for her reputation, and for the future of two innocent children. She stood before the mirror and saw not a frail grandmother, but a warrior with eyes blazing. Helen called again, urgency crackling in her voice. "Are you ready to go public? If we do this, there will be no way back." Madeline paused, remembered the weight of Sophie's hand in hers, remembered the storm of lies that had surrounded her, then spoke clearly. "It is time. They think I am weak, but I will show them the fire inside me has never gone out." That night, thunder clouds gathered over Phoenix. Lightning split the sky. Thunder rumbled like drums of war. Madeline stood by the window, her reflection illuminated in flashes of light. She closed her eyes and whispered into the storm, as though Anthony and Lillian could hear her vow. "You chose the wrong person to betray. Now you will see the strength of a mother who refuses to be broken." Madeline entered Margaret's office on a Monday morning carrying a thick dossier, and spread across the desk lay the loan agreement, photographs of the BMW, receipts from lavish parties, screenshots of Lillian's boastful posts, and the recording of Anthony mocking his mother. She set the stack down and spoke in a voice steady but resolute. "Enough," she said. "I want to begin the proceedings." Margaret scanned the documents with a cool, precise gaze and told her plainly that with this evidence they could do more than demand repayment. They had potential grounds for civil claims and even allegations of financial elder abuse if the pattern of transfers and purchases showed deception and misuse of an elder's funds. Madeline nodded, the hurt in her voice barely restrained, as she said she had been left on the road and could not allow the trampling to continue. That same morning, Margaret prepared the necessary papers, drafting a formal notice demanding full repayment within 30 days and arranging for service by registered mail and by email, so there would be documented proof that the notice had been received. Madeline expected the inevitable chorus of pleas and threats. 2 days later, her phone rang without pause, and she let it go to voicemail several times, knowing their script, waiting for their performance. When a withheld number finally flashed, she hesitated and answered, and Lillian's voice came through cold and brittle, stripped of previous honeyed charm. Madeline replied calmly, "That house is the one I saved. I will only take back what is mine." And Lillian lowered her tone into a pleading edge, warning that the children would hate her forever if she persisted. Madeline's heart tightened, but she answered clearly, "I accept being disliked, but I will not accept being used." Word reached Anthony quickly. One sweltering evening, he appeared in Phoenix, gaunt and hollow-eyed, the strain of sleepless worry written across his face. Madeline opened the door and let him in, but sat apart as he sank into a chair and begged, voice shaking, "Please withdraw the notice. Give me more time. I promise we will repay." Madeline answered coldly, "You had 8 months and paid not a cent, and that is over." Anthony bowed his head, then flared up with sudden heat, accusing her of selfishness, of hoarding money and never thinking of their feelings, of preferring to watch them suffer. Madeline rose like thunder and snapped back. "Suffer with a BMW? Suffer with wine and parties? Stop lying. I have seen everything." Her words cut through his excuses and left him speechless. When he left, she sank into a chair, breath heavy, certain that this was no longer only a dispute about money, but a battle for honor, and that she would not retreat. While Margaret prepared the file, Helen stood as Madeline's steadfast support. One evening, the sisters sat at the kitchen table, and Helen said bluntly, "You are protecting more than cash, Ruth. You are protecting Sophie and Noah. If you step back, they will learn that deceit is acceptable." Madeline nodded, soft but resolute. "I know," she said, "and that is why I must go all the way." News of the repayment demand spread fast. Neighbors who once smiled now exchanged suspicious looks. Acquaintances whispered, and the parties, the expensive car, and Lillian's designer dresses quickly became marks of scandal. Anthony responded with a flood of calls and messages, at first pleading, then angry threats. "Leave this alone," he warned, "and then I will make you regret this." But Madeline listened in silence, understanding that desperation makes people reckless. Sure enough, a few days later, Sarah Chen returned with a solemn face and informed her that additional reports suggested emotional instability that could pose a risk to the children, and that protocol required an independent mental health evaluation. Madeline demanded who made the accusation, but Sarah refused to name a source, citing investigation procedure. Helen called the claim slanderous, but Madeline took a deep breath and agreed to the assessment, determined to prove her clarity. On the appointed day, she sat through hours of interviews, memory tests, and logic tasks, clinical assessment under a calm professional eye, and at the end, the doctor offered a small, approving smile, reporting that her cognition was intact with no signs of impairment and handing her a formal certificate. Madeline felt a rush of emotion. The certificate was more than paper. It was a shield for her dignity and a weapon against further falsehood. She sent the report to Margaret at once, and the lawyer read it with satisfaction, declaring that the smear campaign had instead trapped them. With the contract, the evidence of deception, and now psychological clearance, Anthony and Lillian had effectively dug their own grave. The letters had been prepared and the envelopes sealed with return receipts requested, ensuring there could be no plausible denial of notice. The legal machinery was in motion, and Madeline felt less vulnerable. As word of the dispute spread through the neighborhood, the social atmosphere shifted. Mothers at the market lowered their voices. Polite neighbors exchanged knowing glances, and invitations cooled as the glossy veneer of Lillian's lifestyle began to crack. That night, Madeline watched the city lights and felt a calm pride, not of triumph but of relief, having stepped out of the shadow of fear into the light of truth. Their betrayal had awakened a strength in her. In that moment, she understood this fight was not only for $80,000 but for dignity. A declaration that a mother who has been hurt, abandoned, or scorned when she rises becomes a storm that washes away lies. And the storm, she knew, had only begun. The news that Madeline had passed the psychological evaluation and now held in her hands an official certificate of clarity struck Anthony and Lillian like a blade through the heart of their plan. The last shield they had raised to smear their mother had collapsed, but instead of retreating, they rushed headlong down a desperate road, becoming more dangerous than ever before. One afternoon, Margaret called Madeline, her voice heavy with concern. "Ruth, I just received a notice. Someone tried to access your bank account. The bank blocked the attempt in time, but clearly someone has your login information." Madeline clutched the phone, her chest tightening. "Anthony," she whispered. She needed no proof, only the instinct of a mother who had seen the greedy glint in her son's eyes. The very next day, the investigator delivered more evidence. In Anthony's email searches were inquiries about countries without extradition treaties. There was a round-trip ticket to Mexico booked under a false name. Lillian was withdrawing cash from multiple ATMs across the city. The signs were plain as day. They were preparing to flee, perhaps even planning to take Sophie and Noah with them. Helen's fury shook her voice when she heard, If they dare to take the children away, that is abduction. We must alert the police immediately." Madeline was stunned, her heart in agony. She had never believed her son could drag his children into such darkness, yet her fear transformed into strength. She nodded firmly. "We will not allow them to move another step further." Margaret coordinated with the Denver police at once. Surveillance was placed on Anthony's house, every movement recorded. One morning, squad cars pulled up to the curb. Neighbors gathered in alarm as Sophie and Noah peered through the windows, confused and frightened. Lillian yanked the curtains closed. Anthony stormed into the yard, his face flushed red, shouting that this was all slander, but search warrants had already been signed. Officers moved in with stern authority. In a hidden safe beneath the basement floor, they found tens of thousands of dollars in cash, forged identification papers, and fresh passports with new names. The bright suburban home that Madeline had once saved had transformed into a vault of evidence. When word reached Anthony, he called his mother, his voice shaking, trapped between rage and terror. "Mom, how could you do this? You are destroying this family." Madeline's voice was steady, each word like a nail. "Families do not lie, do not steal, do not leave their mothers stranded on the roadside. You chose betrayal. Now you must carry it." Anthony broke into sobs and then hung up. For the first time in months, Madeline no longer felt like a victim. She felt like the keeper of justice. While Anthony collapsed, Lillian tried another move. She called Sophie and Noah and poured venom into their ears, blaming Madeline for everything. "She is selfish. She only thinks about money. Because of her, your father and I have to leave the house." Sophie wept and Noah sat silent. But when Madeline visited them both, children rushed into her arms. Sophie whispered through tears, "They lied, didn't they? I don't believe you would ever want to hurt us." Madeline's embrace tightened, her voice trembling but sure. "I will never harm you. The truth will come to light, and you will know who truly protects you." Back in Phoenix, Madeline sat by the window, staring into the night. She thought of the boy who once buried his face in her arms when frightened, now transformed into a schemer ready to betray anyone. She thought of Lillian, clever with her tongue but cold in her heart, who saw her mother-in-law as nothing more than a living wallet. And she thought of Sophie and Noah, innocent children caught in the storm. One evening, Margaret called, her voice quick and urgent. "Ruth, the police have gathered enough evidence. Anthony and Lillian will be arrested this week, but prepare yourself. They will not go quietly." Madeline inhaled deeply. "I am ready." They thought I would remain silent. They were wrong. This time, I will see it through to the end. The following day, Helen came to see her. The sisters sat in the kitchen under the warm glow of a lamp, their lined faces firm with determination. Helen squeezed her sister's hand. "We have gone so far, Ruth, but you have done the right thing, not only for yourself, but for Sophie and Noah. If you had given in, they would have grown up learning that deceit is normal." Madeline's eyes brimmed, but her voice was clear. "Yes, and if this is the last battle of my life, I want to finish it with my head held high." Outside, a summer storm gathered, thunder rolling across the sky. Lightning illuminated the small room, casting her long shadow across the floor. Madeline stood by the window, her silhouette etched against the stormlight. She whispered as if sending a final warning straight to Anthony and Lillian. "You can lie, you can spin stories, but you cannot silence the truth. And when truth rises, it will sweep away everything you built on deceit." The heavens rumbled as though in answer, thunder echoing her vow. She was 70 years old, once dismissed as fragile, but now she was the storm itself, and the storm was bearing down on the traitors. On Thursday morning, Madeline awoke to the piercing ring of the telephone. On the line was Margaret, her tone brisk and urgent. "Ruth, the time has come." Early this morning, Colorado police carried out the arrest warrants for Anthony and Lillian. They are charged with fraud, financial abuse, and conspiracy to flee. The children have been placed under temporary care by social services. Madeline froze in her chair, her hands gripping the delicate porcelain teacup until a fine crack spread across its surface. The moment she had anticipated for months had arrived, yet instead of triumph, she felt a crushing sorrow for her son. The boy who once clung to her in fear was now being led away in handcuffs like a stranger condemned. The media pounced quickly. Within hours, her television filled with images of Anthony shuffling with his head down, wrists bound in steel, while Lillian wept dramatically but tried to keep her chin high with feigned dignity. A police spokesperson addressed the press. "We discovered large sums of cash, forged documents, and a plan to flee the country." This was calculated fraud, with the primary victim being his own mother and other elderly relatives. Every word struck Madeline's chest like a hammer. Helen sat beside her, placed a firm hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "You did what had to be done, Ruth. They chose this path. It was never you." Madeline nodded faintly, her eyes burning with tears. "But to see him in chains, it feels as if my heart has been torn apart." Helen squeezed her hand firmly. "This pain will protect Sophie and Noah. Remember that." The following day, Madeline was granted a supervised visit with her grandchildren at the foster center. As she entered the sterile room, Sophie bolted toward her, arms outstretched, tears pouring. "Grandma, where are Mom and Dad? Where did they go?" Noah lingered behind, his wide eyes confused and frightened. Madeline knelt down and gathered them both into her arms. Her voice trembled but carried conviction. "Your parents made very big mistakes, and now they must face the consequences. But I and Aunt Helen will never let you be alone." Sophie wiped her eyes, looked up, and whispered, "They said you told on them, that you betrayed them. Is it true?" Madeline clasped her granddaughter's small hand tightly. "I did not betray anyone. I told the truth, and truth is the only thing that can protect us." Sophie fell silent, then hugged her more tightly. Noah leaned close and whispered softly, "Grandma, I believe you." Those 3 words, so fragile and pure, stitched together a part of her shattered soul. Meanwhile, Margaret and the district attorney pressed forward with the investigation. They uncovered that Anthony and Lillian had not only cheated Madeline, but had also borrowed heavily from Lillian's parents, disappearing when payment was demanded. A long list of victims emerged, neighbors and elderly acquaintances, each carrying wounds of betrayal. The case against them grew heavier with every file uncovered. One afternoon, Margaret came to Madeline's apartment. "Ruth, I am preparing for the preliminary hearing. Anthony may attempt to plead for leniency, perhaps blaming Lillian or gambling. Do you wish to see him before it begins?" Madeline froze, her chest tightening. The thought of seeing her son in prison clothes churned her stomach. She longed to look him in the eye and ask why, yet she feared breaking under the weight of blood and memory. After a long silence, she answered with steel, "No, I have already seen the truth. I do not need to hear another lie." That evening, Madeline sat by her Phoenix window, gazing at the distant lights of the city. She remembered the night Anthony had called her, his voice trembling, begging for rescue. Then she had believed that a mother's love was a bond stronger than iron. Now she knew some bonds rot and fray, waiting only for the cut of a blade. But from her grief rose another truth. Sophie and Noah remained, and they would be the reason she stood tall. 2 weeks later came decisive news. The court had granted temporary custody of Sophie and Noah to Helen while the case was pending, with Madeline holding full visitation rights. When she heard, tears streamed down her cheeks. But for the first time, they were tears of relief. Helen embraced her and whispered, "From now on, we will raise them with real love, with no lies." On moving day, the children carried only small bags, yet their eyes shone with hope. Sophie looked around Helen's warm kitchen and said softly, "This feels like a real home." Noah added quietly, "No one yells at me here." Madeline stood nearby, her eyes blurred but her heart steady. She knew the path ahead would be long, but in that moment the children had stepped out of the storm of lies. Late that night, when the house was silent, Madeline sat on the porch and looked up at the stars. She thought of Anthony and Lillian locked in their cells, thought of the false home they had built, a castle of deception crumbling to dust. She no longer saw herself as weak or guilty. She saw herself as a survivor, a bearer of truth. And she whispered into the night, a vow carved into her soul, "Even if I have lost a son, I will save my grandchildren. This is my family, my future, my purpose." The courtroom glowed under a harsh blaze of white lights, tall windows filtering cold rays that seemed to expose every secret lurking in the air. The benches were packed. People craned their necks, whispers echoing as the public gathered for what the press had labeled the family case that shocked the state. Every journalist clutched a notepad. Cameras clicked, the atmosphere so tense it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. In the first row, Madeline sat upright, her fingers entwined tightly, her chest rising and falling with a rapid rhythm. Her heart was trembling with fear, yet filled with pride. For after months of betrayal, humiliation, and loneliness, today the truth would finally be revealed in full daylight. The heavy wooden doors creaked open. Anthony was led inside, his wrists shackled in iron, his face gaunt, his hair messy, yet he tried to keep his chin raised in defiance. Behind him came Lillian, her lips pressed shut, still clinging to vanity in a dark blue dress brushed to perfection, as though fabric could preserve dignity already lost. Anthony's eyes flickered toward his mother. For a fleeting second there was hesitation, then the cold mask returned. Madeline met his stare directly. Pain stabbed deep within her chest, but she refused to lower her gaze. The prosecutor rose, voice loud and commanding, filling every corner. The defendants Anthony Brooks and Lillian Brooks conspired to defraud, seizing more than $200,000 from multiple victims, among them Anthony's own mother. They deliberately abandoned her at a remote highway rest stop to intimidate and coerce her. This was no temporary lapse, but an organized pattern of crime. Gasps and murmurs swept the audience. Some shook their heads, appalled. Madeline tightened her grip on the wooden bench, but her eyes glowed as if to say, "At last someone dared to speak the truth." The defense attorney stood, speaking gently. Anthony struggled with a destructive gambling addiction. He was under unbearable pressure. Lillian, a loyal wife, was merely dragged into the spiral. This is a family tragedy, not deliberate crime. For a moment, some faces wavered, but then they turned toward Madeleine, who sat firm, her face carved with grief yet strength, and the sympathy drained away. When her turn came, Madeleine walked toward the witness stand. Each step felt heavy as stone, yet her back remained straight. The judge nodded for her to begin. The prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Brooks, please tell the court what happened the day you were abandoned." Madeleine's voice rang clear, unwavering, each syllable slicing the silence. "My son drove off, leaving me in the wilderness with no luggage, no medicine. I begged him. He replied, 'You chose money over family.'" I saw my granddaughter's face pressed to the window, crying until her breath fogged the glass. In that moment, I knew I was no longer a mother or grandmother in their eyes, only a burden to discard. The gallery went silent. An elderly man in the back wiped away tears. A woman shook her head, murmuring, "Cruel, so cruel." The defense lawyer tried to interject. Perhaps she misinterpreted, given the emotional stress. Madeline turned, her eyes shining fiercely. "I have lived 70 years. I can distinguish truth from lies. And I hold a signed contract, Anthony's handwriting, proof he never intended to repay." The prosecutor then revealed images from Lillian's phone, photographs of glittering parties, branded handbags, luxury trips. Projected on the screen was a caption, "Thanks to Anthony's mother's money, we are truly free." A ripple of outrage surged through the room. Lillian lowered her head. Cheeks flushed scarlet. Anthony clenched his jaw, fury sparking in his eyes, but he stayed silent. Then came the climax. The prosecutor read aloud a message seized from their devices. "If the old woman does not surrender, we will let her taste isolation. Then she will beg." The chilling words hung in the courtroom, making even the faintest cough resound like thunder. Madeleine closed her eyes, drew a long breath, and accepted the truth she once refused to face. She had dreamed that maternal love might rescue her son, but reality was merciless. To him, she had been nothing but prey. Anthony was invited to speak. His voice trembled, caught between defense and plea. "Mom, I was wrong. But if you forgive me, we can begin again. I promise." Tears rolled down his cheeks, but Madeleine's resolve did not falter. She looked directly at him, her voice low but unwavering. "Anthony, my love as a mother still exists, but respect is gone, and you destroyed it yourself." The words cracked across the room like a gavel before the verdict. Anthony's body sagged, shoulders quivering, his head bowed in silence. The judge struck his gavel, declaring a recess. Madeleine descended from the stand, her steps heavy but her heart strangely light. Helen rushed to her side, gripping her hand. "You did what you feared most, speaking truth before him, and in doing so, you won." Later that afternoon, the sentence was delivered. Anthony received 12 years in prison. Lillian was sentenced to 15 for fraud and perjury. As police fastened the cuffs, Lillian screamed, "Madeleine, you destroyed this family." Madeleine shook her head calmly and whispered, "A family does not need traitors." When she returned home, Sophie ran into her arms, clinging with sobs. "Grandma," I heard. "They said Mom and Dad are going to prison. I am so scared." Madeleine stroked her hair, her voice both tender and firm. "Do not be afraid. I and Aunt Helen will always be here. You will never be abandoned again." Noah lifted tear-streaked eyes and whispered, "Grandma, you are so strong. I want to be like you." At that moment, Madeleine realized she had not lost everything. She had regained her true family, not by blood alone, but through love, protection, and loyalty. And in that truth lay the greatest victory of her life. After the trial, Madeleine's small apartment carried a different atmosphere. It was no longer the place where she sat alone surrounded by memories of betrayal, but became a sanctuary of peace for the children who had lost their parents, yet still yearned for love. Each morning, Sophie's laughter rang through the kitchen as she ran downstairs. Noah followed with the thump of his soccer ball, and the hollow spaces once filled with silence now pulsed with life. Helen moved close by, visiting daily, bringing her steady energy, serving as a protective wall, shielding them all from the aftershocks of the past. One evening, Sophie shyly placed a drawing on the table. It showed Madeleine, Helen, Noah, and Sophie herself, standing beneath a glowing roof with a colorful garden around them. There was no Anthony, no Lillian. Sophie whispered, "I drew our family." Madeleine pulled her close, eyes stinging with tears. For the first time, she understood family was not measured by blood, but by choice and loyalty. Anthony and Lillian awaited sentencing. A letter from Anthony's lawyer arrived saying he wanted forgiveness, wanted peace of mind in prison. Madeleine opened it, read a few lines, then folded it shut. Apologies made too late were like shadows after lightning, vanishing quickly. Maternal love still lingered in her heart, but respect had shattered. She no longer sought redemption from those who had turned her devotion into a weapon. She would devote herself to the present, to the grandchildren who needed true love. On Sophie's first day at a new school, Madeleine and Helen walked her to the gates. Sophie clutched her grandmother's hand and whispered, "Grandma, my friends will ask where my parents are. What should I say?" Madeline knelt beside her. You can tell them they are far away. What matters is not where they are, but that you are never alone. I and Aunt Helen will always be here. Sophie nodded, trust shining in her eyes. Noah found joy in soccer, practicing tirelessly, sweat on his brow but a bright smile on his face. One afternoon he ran home breathless. Coach said, "I have talent. I want to try, Grandma." Madeline stroked his hair. "Play with your heart, Noah, and remember, I and Aunt Helen will always cheer for you." Life settled into rhythm, but Madeline refused to let the past fade. She joined organizations advocating for elder protection, sharing her story in halls filled with listeners. Tears glistened in many eyes as she declared, "I once believed family bonds could never break, but sometimes it is family who makes us victims. In those moments, do not remain silent. Stand up. Truth will protect you." Her words carried like a beacon, empowering others who had endured similar pain. A year later, Madeline chose to move permanently with Helen and the children. Together they bought a suburban house with a wide yard where Sophie could set up her easel and Noah could practice soccer. Madeline planted a cascade of red bougainvillea along the porch, and each morning its sunlit blossoms felt like a balm to her heart. Helen said, "We walked through hell, now we deserve our small heaven." Madeline smiled in agreement. On warm summer nights, the four of them sat on the porch, listening to cicadas. Helen laughed. "We are a special family." Sophie interrupted. "No, a real family." Noah nodded. "A happy family." Madeline embraced them all and whispered, "Family are the people who choose to stay, and we have chosen." Still, shadows of the past sometimes returned. In dreams, Madeline saw Anthony as a little boy, running to show her scraped knees, eyes full of trust. She woke with her pillow wet, but instead of despair, she smiled, because now she knew love had passed to a new generation. She could not save Anthony, but she could save Sophie and Noah. On Noah's birthday, they held a small garden party. His friends came, laughter filling the air. Sophie gave him a drawing of the family flying kites together. When Noah blew out the candles, he wished, "I hope our family stays together forever." Madeline's heart overflowed. One autumn afternoon, Sophie asked quietly, "Grandma, do you regret taking Mom and Dad to court?" Madeline paused, then answered softly, "It hurt deeply, but I do not regret it. Without that choice, I might have lost you both forever." Sophie leaned against her shoulder. "Then I will remember. Truth may hurt, but it saves us." Time passed and Madeline became a recognized voice in campaigns about elder abuse. The press called her the courageous grandmother who turned the tide. But to Sophie and Noah, she was simply Grandma Ruth, the one who cooked warm meals, listened to their stories, and held them through nightmares. Helen, too, changed. She wrote a book titled Cooking for the Family We Choose, telling of meals that stitched their lives together. It became a sensation among caregivers raising grandchildren. Sophie illustrated it, Noah added candid photographs, and together they transformed pain into creativity. One spring morning, Madeline stood in the garden watching Sophie sketch and Noah practice kicks. She closed her eyes, inhaling the fragrance of bougainvillea mixed with sunlight. She thought, "I lost a son, but I gained a true family." She knew challenges remained, but fear no longer ruled her. She had learned to stand, to choose love, and most importantly, to teach her grandchildren that family may not be perfect, but it must be the safest place. And she whispered, as a closing vow to her journey, "Betrayal once broke me, but it also gave me the chance to rebuild a home with love and pride, and this time, it will endure forever." There are stories that make us fall silent, not because of loud sobs, but because of the silence left behind after betrayal. Madeline endured the deepest pain when her own son and daughter-in-law turned her into a victim. They abandoned her by the roadside, stripping away her trust, her love, and her dignity. But she did not collapse. She rose, transforming pain into strength, protecting herself and saving her two grandchildren. This story reminds us that family is not only about blood. Family is made of those who stay, who protect us, and who choose to love us each day. Sometimes we must face the painful truth that certain ties must be released in order to reclaim peace and dignity. Strength is not in clinging to what is already decayed, but in daring to walk forward, daring to defend ourselves, and daring to rebuild from the ruins. If Madeline's journey touches the wounds you have carried, remember this: you are not alone. You have the right to speak, the right to protect yourself, and the right to choose your true family, the people who bring you safety, respect, and genuine love. Share your thoughts in the comments. Pass this story on so others may find strength. And do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss other stories of resilience and inspiration. Because sometimes a single story is enough to change the way we see life and the way we choose to love.